The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell within. It is Friday, the 3rd day of November, 2023, and it's time to open up our devotional book to the designated date, and it is November 3rd, and it is entitled, Should Christians Tithe? That's Should Christians Tithe? And the verse today? Psalms 24, verse 1. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, the world and those who dwell within. That's Psalms 24, verse 1. Alistair Begg writes, when the topic of biblical stewardship and finances comes up, what is the one guiding principle that quickly comes to mind? The most common answer is almost certainly tithing. And yet, for a word that historically has been used so often in the language of church life, there's good deal of misunderstanding about what it actually means to tithe. So, what does the Bible teach about tithing and the Christian's relationship to it? First, the tithe, the word simply means a tenth, was a basic principle of giving in the Old Testament. From the beginning, the Jewish people were to bring tithes of their crops and livestock to the Lord. Leviticus chapter 27, verse 30. These tithes were brought to the Levites, the temple workers, who would then give a tenth of the tithe to the priests. This pattern was established firmly and fairly in the law of Moses, but as spiritual indifference set in among the people, the practice fell into disuse. For example, we read of Nehemiah's dismay when he found out that the portions of the Levites had not been given to them. So I confronted the officials and said, why is the house of God forsaken? And that's Nehemiah chapter 13, verses 10 and 11. Second, why tithing is a pattern of the giving in the Old Testament, it is not stated as an obligation in the New Testament. There we are confronted by an eloquent silence on the subject. There must be significance. We would expect that someone like Paul, with his intimate knowledge of the law, would have affirmed the Old Testament patterns, or at least alluded to it as a principle to be applied in the church, but he does not. How then is a Christian to respond to these two observations? Should we tithe in the way that the Israelites were commanded to do, or do we ignore that principle in the way that the New Testament seems to? Well, it is true that tithe is not explicitly commanded in the New Testament, but neither is it explicitly rejected. So while we are not to offer tithe as a matter of obedience to the Old Testament law, neither should we simply ignore the principle. The idea of giving 10% could be a good starting point for Christians, but it is a starting point and no more. For if you are careful, the principle of tithe can be used to alleviate any conscience as we give the bare minimum and try to keep God out of our business. The problem with that kind of approach is that, as the psalmist writes, the earth and all its fullness is the Lord's, including every last cent and possession we claim as ours. We think of ourselves as giving to God, but in truth, He owns it all. The relationship of the Christian to the principle of tithing, then, is not a neat and clean one. 10% may be far too much for you at the moment, or it may be far too comfortable. So perhaps the best way forward is to use that number as your starting point and then to ask God for wisdom and integrity as you look at your finances and at your heart. Let Him reveal how you can faithfully use your finances, which, in truth, are His finances for His glory. A quite simple and understandable concept of tithing, and may the Spirit of God minister to our hearts. And it's often said, a person's wallet determines so often what's in their heart, or vice versa. A person's heart can sometimes be clearly seen by what comes out of their wallet. May the Spirit of God minister to us in this very, very important principle, remembering that the earth is the Lord and the fullness therein. God bless you as you consider these principles in light of the Holy Spirit of God and what He's saying to your heart right now. And those of you reading through the Scriptures in a year, your assignment is 2 Samuel chapter 23 and 24, as well as Colossians chapter 1. Clive Walsh here. May the Lord richly bless you and give you a great day today.